Hey, everybody!
Hey,
Matt from the Dan and Matt Show. I am joined by my excellent colleague.
Dan.
Yeah, that's right. I can't. Some weeks it's the Matt and Dan Show. Other times
Yeah,
it's the Dan and Matt Show. I'm
yeah,
trying to be equitable here, Dan.
exactly. Balance
This
it
is
out.
this is a 50-50 venture after all,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I guess before we kind of just get right into things, how's it been going, man? We were supposed to do this like
I
a couple
know.
of weeks ago.
And just things just kept happening.
Well,
Um,
I take responsibility for the first instance of that.
yeah.
I've documented on my social media and with the other
Hmm.
podcast about how I just sort of upped and ran away to Kelowna for a few days and came
Yeah.
back as a straight edge vegan, uh, surprising everybody
Yeah.
who notices these things, especially
Hmm.
me. And I don't know, man. It's easy go. It's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. It's
Yeah.
I
That's
got I
that's
got
good.
I got my Heineken 0.0.
Oh,
And
nice.
the problem with this stuff is that it actually costs the same as regular beer.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It does. It though I don't know about BC, but I know out here you can get like a President's Choice brand like red ale that tastes pretty decent, like alcohol-free red ale or something that tastes pretty decent. And
Okay. I
yeah,
got I
like I I don't drink very much anyway, and I've gone through times where I didn't at all. And I
Right.
appreciate a de-alcoholized beverage at times, because sometimes you just want, you know, like
You
you don't
want
want to
the
get messed up.
taste. You
Exactly.
know,
You want to get
I
that clear mind, man.
I can't
Um,
imagine that, man. I'm telling you, after a week of being off of weed and alcohol, and by the
yeah.
way, yeah, I'm not. I told my, one of my academic colleagues on a call, a few days ago,
Hmm.
back in Ontario. She's like, I don't think I could do that, and I'm like, I'm not going to be this evangelical, flogging
Yeah.
you with a piece of celery or,
Exactly.
with my self righteousness.
Hmm.
Although, come to think of it, some of the musicians in this show
I was gonna
may
say,
in fact be a little bit more militant.
yeah.
I took my kids earlier to McDonald's today, and my son and my older boy, he was just like, so can I eat like just whatever food, and
Yeah.
does it have to be vegetarian? And I'm like,
Hmm.
no, just have your friggin' ice cream, man. Like it's
Yeah.
whatever. So Dan, we're doing another show about regional scenes here, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Ongoing series. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what the episode here is, bud?
Well, because since this got pushed out, actually, I've kind of found more reasons to want to talk about this particular region since initially pitching this topic. But
Okay.
I was thinking since Edmonton's Homefront released a new album on March 3rd, the
Okay.
really great Games of Power on Levita Essun Moose Records,
So
that
hold
it's like.
on. Are you suggesting then, Dan, that this episode is about Western Canada as a whole?
Yes, I was
Okay,
thinking since
swell.
one of my
Okay,
favorite newer bands from the prairies was putting out a release. Might as well talk about some other bands from the prairie. And the fact that
oh
we've teased
no,
talking about one of them for a little while, that yeah, might as well talk about some bands from the prairie region. Um,
absolutely.
yeah, and since that time, because I always tend to have like two or three books and like a couple of video games and various podcasts on the go at the same time at various degrees of completion. I've started reading Kate Beaton's graphic novel Ducks,
I
about
saw
her
that on your
time.
Instagram. You put that on your
Yes, it's
Instagram,
about
right?
her time
Yeah.
working in the oil sands in northern Alberta. And
Dope.
as well, I've been about a third of the way into Bedroom Rapper by Rolly Pemberton, former Edmonton Poet Laureate, and one of the folks on
What?
my list, aka Cadence Weapon, which is his sort of
Okay,
memoir
okay.
and sort of hip hop history for the uninitiated.
So this is going to be
So
great
yeah,
because
this
I'm
has all kind of been like time to talk about the prairies, and like it's another region that like my parents live in Edmonton. So I've had limited. Actually, I saw the synth player from Homefront's old band, the Franklins, a couple of times, just in trying to find something to do in the city when going to visit my parents in the past and that sort of thing. So I got a lot of I know this, and I mean Winnipeg's produced a lot of great
And you
stuff as
said
well, as I'm sure we'll discuss.
so can I just ask, Dan? I mean, just to sort
Yeah.
of for the broader context, if you will.
Yep.
So have you? I mean, I know you've sort of traveled and rambled around Canada variously, and you just you've mentioned just now and also previously that your
Yep.
folks are in Alberta.
Yep.
So have you spent like a significant time in the Prairie provinces? Because I actually haven't been even once to Manitoba or Saskatchewan, to be honest.
So
I've flown over them more times than I can count, but I've never, I've been to Alberta and but out of the three prairie provinces, so-called, I just have not had lived experience. Have you, man, or what?
yes. So actually, the day after, I guess my sister and you would have been. Were you and Janice in the same grade?
Oh yeah, definitely.
So
We started grade 10 at the same time.
day after you two would have had your grad ceremony, my entire family packed up and moved to Alberta.
Whoa.
My dad had been out there for like a year prior to that, already working, and then like myself and my sister and my mom all moved out there as well. And first in a little town called Grand Cache, which is kind of in the foothills, like just when the Rockies start to become the Rockies.
Oh, gotcha. All right.
And I spent a couple months there, and then ended up moving to Calgary, where I lived from like the summer of '96 until the beginning. I think the beginning of 1998, and
that's a pretty significant period.
And that's when I moved to BC.
Okay.
When I left there, and it was through that's where I met a lot of the folks that I ended up.
Have you been to Saskatchewan very much, or Manitoba particularly, or?
I've passed through Saskatchewan a couple of times. I've been to Winnipeg a few times. Actually,
I feel like I should go to Winnipeg. It seems like a pretty,
Yeah. So I'll
place, right?
Yeah. There's been that was one of the few places that the band that I played in when I lived in Calgary. One of the few sort of out of town shows we planned that we actually made.
What were y'all called, Dan? I don't mean.
We were called Consumer Identity. It was
dope.
It was myself and a guy named Ian Russell, who co-owns a record label called Flemish Eye, with one of my other picks for this evening, a guy named Chad Van Galen, who I was going to say for the notes, but still. Anyways, and also a dude named Jordan Tetzer, who currently plays in a band called Crystallize out of Calgary, that are kind of shoegazy band. And a dude named Aram Arslanian, who is pretty big in like the straight edge hardcore scene, not to name drop, but he's in a band called Change that's pretty popular, and he has a podcast about like business management, using like positive mental attitude for business management or something like that. Exactly. Like it's a little corny, but anyways, we basically made a small sort of local career of ripping off a bunch of riffs from the first song on the first Converge album.
Very good. If you're going to steal from the best.
Exactly. So it was like that sort of thing. And it was a lot of fun.
Any recorded output by chance?
Yes, and I can even direct you to where to find them.
Please do. Please put that in your show notes, because that definitely deserves to be on the website for sure.
Well, I wanted to generally at some point mention there's a website called the Calgary Cassette Preservation Society.
You mentioned that in the Facebook thing. Yeah. What is that, dude?
Exactly. What it is, it's a blog that the person that runs it, like, they've just combed every internet resource possible. Like, they have recording, like, that's where I found copies of the Consumer Identity recordings that I didn't actually own anymore.
Oh, wow.
And like there was a recording I didn't get a copy of.
That's like me with my. That's like me with my.
The master copy got stolen from the drummer's like apartment when he was doing a year abroad, like with art school, like going to art school in Edinburgh, Scotland, or something, and it just never really went anywhere. But another burned copy somehow made it into this guy's hands, and like photos I'd never seen before of the band and stuff. And just like he's got like literally decades of music from Calgary documented in like, and it was like MediaFire files for a while. He's got different hosting sites for these, just like zip, your classic music log zip files.
Wow.
But like, like I said, going back to like the 70s and early 80s. Like I remember finding a bunch of stuff by Color Me Psycho, who were like a kind of like spooky goth, like horror core band from Calgary in the 80s, and like
Horrorcore from Alberta, man.
yeah, featuring Tom Bagley, who was later in Forbidden Dimension, who were kind of a thing in the 90s.
Yeah,
and he did
I know
art
who
for
they
like
are.
Chicks
Yeah.
Dig It and stuff like that.
Neat.
Anyways, yeah, like if you were ever curious about any music from Calgary, like go there.
One-stop shop, eh?
Exactly. Like
Oh,
it was cool. Like even like there's a really great comic book artist originally from Regina named Zach Wharton, that like his crust punk band that he was in for like a year when I lived in Calgary, like their demo is on there. And like
wow.
it's like it's like him and
man.
like and just like a lot of really obscure stuff like that that I hadn't seen forever, that just like
wow.
and just like
is there like a social media presence associated with that?
They have
like,
a
is there an
Facebook
Instagram
page
or something?
too, but it's just like if you Google Calgary Cassette Preservation Society, you'll find the page.
Okay.
And then it's just a matter of like looking,
navigating through the volume of material.
Exactly. But anyways, I played in that band for a little while when I lived there, and that was kind of my introduction to playing in like a quote unquote real band, like that played like, or you know, like a band that played show, like did
don't be
recordings in
diminishing Fun with Chainsaw, dude.
Yeah, not to
like
diminish Fun with Chainsaws, but like that was the first band that used actual recording equipment to record that I was in, that had amps that were not just one piece. It was like a head and a cabinet.
Drums
and
with
like
sticks.
Yeah, exactly. And I did a lot of this move with my bass, like the pointing, and we were really big because it was, you know, it was the sort of the prime of like the screamy emotive hardcore kind of thing.
Do you still play the bass guitar at all, Dan? Or not
I
really?
do not. I haven't been. The last time I played bass in a band was probably about 9 years ago.
Okay.
But yeah, it's been a little while. It's something I always kind of did off and on, and I definitely, like, you know, was the least talented person in that band. But yeah, so that was my introduction to the music scene in Calgary. And like,
is the least talented person.
Exactly.
Unless you're Lemmy,
yeah.
You know, otherwise like, you're just
Lemmy.
Like, whoa, nobody cares what you're playing.
Rob Wright from No Means No.
Yes.
And like, yeah, maybe one or two others, but like, yeah. So it was, you know, I've got a little bit of experience there, and I've gone back. You know, since my parents live outside of Edmonton.
Okay.
But anytime I've gone to visit them in the past little while, I've always made a point of just like spending a night or two in the city. And like people I know from when I lived in Calgary, some of them live in Edmonton, and like I just sort of, you know, I know people there. Like I have a little circle of friends when I do go there. And I've ended up at some shows here or there, and like, you know, gotten to see some bands from Edmonton, saying like the early aughts and that sort of thing. And yeah, you know, I still know some people in the music scene in that area, like, and yeah, it's one of those towns where like you'll get those folks that like you can chart sort of from 1992 to present, like,
it's been visible
in different styles, like. Oh, they even mentioned in that in Cadence Weapons book, he even mentions that one guy from Edmonton that plays, and like that I can remember like his old like oi bands from the 90s that was then like in like, you know, a coked out dance punk band in the aughts, and like, you know, had a band that sang about soccer in the 90s when Rancid was really popular and that sort of thing, like. And yeah, it's just kind of, it's one of those towns. So anyways, yeah, we wanted to talk about the prairies.
Well, that's fantastic. And just something that sort of occurred to me while I was sort of just envisioning a little bit about, you know, what my contribution to this might be. I got to say, like, out of all the regional scene stuff that we've done or that we, you know, could potentially do, I just, you know, this is the one where I just, from lack of physical proximity, I mean, the stuff that's in my list is like, most of it's kind of new to me, honestly, just within the past, you know, year or so since I've started kind of just going all in on vinyl. And I count myself pretty fortunate for that. But I guess I would just say, dude, so first of all, Cadence Weapon, that is dope. Thank you for that connection.
I was gonna keep my newer ones sort of more to the notes, but just to give you a quick overview of the two newer artists that I had, they're both kind of polymaths.
Sure.
You got Cadence Weapon, who, you know, is a musician, writer. He was like a Pitchfork reviewer at 17. Like I said, he was Edmonton's poet laureate at one point. Yeah, like he's written this book.
Pitchfork reviewer at 17.
Exactly. That was just the chapter that I just listened to that was about his beefs with various artists over their reviews. But anyways, yeah, and also Chad Van Galen, who is a sort of he's basically like the Rick White of Calgary in a lot of ways, in terms of making kind of like psychedelic, kind of damaged indie pop. But he's also like he's got maritime ties because he's an animator as well. Like he does 2D cell animation.
Oh.
And all of his music videos are just like this really intense psychedelic like 2D cell animations that he creates on his own, on top of making the music. And he was the artist in residence at like some gallery at Mount Allison University or something in Sackville, New Brunswick for a while. So he's kind of got those maritime, those New Brunswick ties there too. So yeah, those are my two newer artists, but there were three kind of, more classic, or four more classics. One of them's a twofer.
So like in terms of just, the artists you sort of prepared, did you like rank them hierarchically, or?
Well, I had
like, who's the first on your list?
Okay, so I figured I'll go with my little twofer that I had, which I wanted to pick sort of the two biggest workhorses from the scene that I remember, just sort of on like a DIY level when I was sort of living in that area, which were Winnipeg's The Bonaducci's. And
the Bonaducci's. I'm just thinking Danny Bonaducci, that weirdo.
Yeah. And also a band from Calgary called Showdown 76. And I just kind of wanted to do a quick, just little like quick shots about two of them, where the Bonaducci's were one of the out of town bands that I enjoyed seeing the most when I lived in Calgary. They were kind of like a bridge between like more like the propaganda end of like, your sort of political vegan kids in the scene, and then like Endearing Records, which is like an indie rock label that put out bands like Bell, that was pretty popular more in like the campus radio side. And the Bonaducci's were, they put stuff out on Endearing, but they were more sort of part of that like political pop punk scene. And yeah, their songs are just like, it's like collections of short stories about like the adventures and allergic reactions of like a bunch of traveling vagabond kids in a shitty prairie town. And I realized listening, they've got two albums that are both available on Bandcamp. And they've just got, in retrospect, they've got a lot of theater kid energy, shall we say? But
characters incorporated.
Exactly. And but like their guitarist was just like, they're one of these bands that just had like really wild like live shows where they had a guitarist that basically looked like Weird Al, named Mike Coop, who would just sort of be like jumping in the air during their entire set. And yeah, like they would come through, and also they were my introduction to the comic book work of Adrian Tomine, because they stole his art just blatantly for a couple t-shirt designs.
If you're gonna steal for the best.
Exactly. So yeah, they were like, when I was living in Calgary, they were one of the out of town bands that would come play sort of like the level of shows that I would help put on.
You were involved in the promotion of shows.
Exactly. There was a collective called the Just a Bunch of Kids Collective, that were probably, it was basically whoever wanted to help, work the door and then sweep up afterwards.
Free tickets to the show. I mean,
yeah, exactly. Just to like sort of help make things happen. But sort of one of the local bands in Calgary that I feel like is just completely undersung is this band Showdown 76.
Okay.
They were around, I don't even know how long they lasted necessarily. I feel like they broke up not long after I moved away in like 1998 or so. They have one album called Words That Sting that's just like I put it just like, they were like Alberta's answer to like a Semi-Am or like Jawbreaker, like that sort of level of things. But they were just like those dudes who never got to tour because they all had shitty day jobs. And like their guitarist Jeff Casey was like the person that did like the long running punk rock show on the campus radio station in Calgary, CJSW. And then like he eventually went on to a band called started a band called Porter Hall, that they were at least sort of a mid-level regional touring act, where like Showdown 76, I don't even know if they ever left Calgary, But yeah, like in poking around for this, I found their album on like a rip of their full album on YouTube, and it was just like, oh my god, why did these guys never do anything? You know, like we always kind of joked, we called them the Laverne and Shirley Band, just because they're like one of their songs had like they kind of like borrowed the melody of the theme. You know, they're like, we're gonna do it.
Fantastic.
But yeah, they were, and like I said, the one guy, Jeff Casey, kind of went on to do some things. He had another band called the Browns, that were kind of more like a jokey garage rock band as well. But like Showdown, like I said, they played probably I feel like every other weekend during like the year and a half or 2 years that I lived there, and they just never really left Calgary, and it was too bad. But like I said, you know, I was so stoked to find that rip of their album, and I'm putting it on my show notes just
Fantastic.
for others. Yeah, that like they even got like a decent recording and everything, but it's just like one of these bands that just, you know, like those probably all just got like sold to people they know.
Well, you know,
Yeah.
it's just such as the conundrum of you know, needing to have a job, right?
Exactly. That's, and I mean that's a reality for sure. Like, I mean,
like if
it's the
you
same thing on the East Coast. Like, how many people do we know that were musicians that just kind of like
the
played around
entire
town?
of the Fredericton scene, the
Yeah,
entire,
exactly.
you know, that's
Like, it amazes me to see. I don't know if do you know the band Hard Charger from Fredericton?
oh yes,
Like Dave
yeah.
Cook and like
That's
Tom Blizzard
right.
and those guys.
Those guys.
Yeah,
Okay, so that's
like, you know, those guys were around. Those guys were around the scene as literal children, and then you'll see them. It's like, oh yeah, we're opening for Poison Idea in Zagreb, like,
those
or
guys,
like, you know,
I do
playing
remember
some like big fucking outdoor field in Mexico City or something. Like, you know, like those guys like hustle it. You know, shout out to those guys.
Well, they were committed. You know, I remember seeing Dave around Fredericton just, you know, occasionally afterwards, and yeah, it's just like, yeah, they put themselves on the circuit. You know,
Yeah,
they just
exactly.
they go like, you know, Doom Fest and like all this crazy just, you know, and but they were able to operate in that level because they sort of keyed in on this really, you know, abrasive metalish kind of stuff, but it, you know,
exactly
it into the punk paradigm too. So really, what the hell?
Yeah.
But
so, yeah.
but again,
what's your pick for your first prairie artist, Matt?
Oh yeah, man. Well, again, I'm just gonna sort of start in terms of you know, what's formative, and this is interesting for me. So I mean, you already mentioned Chicks Dig It, and I remember, you know, during my probably first year of going to shows in Fredericton. So, you know, when I was, you know, 15/16, and I remember distinctly seeing Chicks Dig It play at the Pyramid Warehouse.
Yeah.
And this is like before they were, you know, this is before they were even signed to Sub Pop. So this is like 1994 ish. And I don't even necessarily remember so much about their performance, although it was very energetic. And you know, the Pyramid Warehouse was such a fucking dive. It was just such a fucking dive. It was our dive, but it was such a dive.
I was going to mention the Pyramid Warehouse in reference to another band later on too.
Yes, I think I know which one you mean because I was at that show too. And that was insane. But so Chicks Dig It. I was 15. I wrote them a letter. I was just like, man, that was awesome. Because I just remember they had that one song. Should have played football in high school.
Oh yeah, I remember.
And I just remember, like, you know, you bought the cassette at Backstreet or something a couple days before they showed up.
Their demo was pretty big in Fredericton. I remember.
That was hype, man. And then they had that terrible song, "HIV is Killing Me."
Yeah, they had a few. There was a song about.
I wanna, and then another song. I wanna hump you.
I wanna hump you. There was a song about the Mila Caroline and me that was a little like yeah.
It's like you guys are bros.
But
it's like
at the same time, Henry Rollins is No Fun was a jam.
That's true.
Yeah, they you know, they definitely I feel like they, you know, some Chicks Dig It definitely holds up for sure. Actually, their drummer just passed away recently, Dave Alcock. Within the last, I saw somebody. One of my old Calgary friends posted about that recently, but excellent band.
Well, and you know, just I just sent them a letter, just like, hey, I'm in Fredericton, your show kicked ass, and then they actually responded to me. They sent me a postal letter in the mail back.
Oh yeah,
with like just some random like with some random photograph. It wasn't
That's
even a good
great.
photograph. And then just, hey, Matt, thanks for coming to the show. We appreciate you. And I was just like, man, they didn't have to do that. I'm just this teenage nerd. They didn't have to do that. So, I mean, I haven't even followed them since, but honestly, I know that they were on Sub Pop for at least one record. And then, they didn't really stay with Sub Pop. They put out, a bunch of recordings. They managed to tour, off and on. So I'm really glad that once, we're done this recording and I get into the notes a bit more, I'll be able to just, listen to 5 or 6 of their current tracks, or, they're the greatest of the ones that they put out. I checked their YouTube list and didn't see I Want to Hump You, didn't see,
I feel like some of those songs
didn't see Should Have Played Football in High
left
School.
in the past. Yeah, should have, that was, I'm sure that one's still around somewhere.
I could still sing along with that one if I tried. And what's funny now, and just the final irony here is that now, in fact, I have 2 children who, one of whom has essentially, literally played football in high school. So I don't know. That's karma. That's karma doing a boomerang back at me there. So man, I don't know. So in terms of your stuff, dude, I'm just always impressed the way that you always kind of hash it out in terms of scenes, but then in terms of the other art forms, it's almost like my academic-ish kind of mind is like, where's the Venn diagram? And with your stuff, it's like, here's, the one circle with the, music, but then here's this other circle with the graphic art, and here's this other circle with, so all of these separate elements kind of overlapping with each other. I appreciate your approach, dude. That's what I'm trying to say. So what do you got? You got your first 2 in, and
that was kind of a 2 for there. The next one I was going to talk about was a band, like one of those bands that, like, it's like recently, I was thinking about recently, how excited I was about some of the albums that were coming out in early March, and how there's been certain times in my life where there's been albums that I've just, heard about on the horizon that I've really just, sort of been on the edge of my seat to hear. And this next band is one whose debut was definitely one of those albums for me. That is, of course, Winnipeg's The Weaker Thans.
So good. So friggin' good.
And I mean, it was always fun. There was sort of the joke on the first couple, about the first couple of propaganda albums that, there'd be the song about like meat is murder, like end capitalism, and then a song about like P.G. Wodehouse novels, sung by John K. Sampson. So when I heard that he was he'd left propaganda and was starting this new band, I was
The Weaker Thans, dude.
The Weaker Thans, yes, exactly. Yeah. The Weaker Thans. That's who I was talking.
And I think you meant to say Weaker Thans earlier too.
Yes, I did. Sorry,
okay.
I totally I got ahead of myself.
That's fine. That's fine.
But just talking about the Weaker Thans.
Weaker Thans and John K. Sampson. Yeah.
Yes, and John K. Sampson. But because there was the I don't know, I can't remember who it was a split 7-inch with, but there was that song "Letter of Resignation" that ended up on the first Weaker Thans album that was released as a quote-unquote propaganda song that was just John K. Sampson unplugged on like a split 7-inch with somebody. That was just, when I heard that, I was like, oh man, I need more. So I was really excited when their debut Fallow came out in 1997 and just kind of followed them ever since. Actually, when Consumer Identity, that band that I mentioned earlier, being in, when we played in Winnipeg, one of the only things we wanted to do was just see if we could run into John K. Sampson.
Does anybody know what neighborhood he lives in?
Well, the thing is, was he at the time, when he left propaganda, it's like he started 2 projects. He started Weaker Thans, and then he also started a publishing company for a while called Arbiter Ring Publishing. That put out things like, I think they might have put out some poetry books and that sort of thing, but they also put out like they put out I think it was called like books on like participatory economics and things like that, just like kind of like almost like pseudo Marxist theory type stuff, on top of like playing in this sort of more chill melodic band than the band that he'd previously been in. And the Arbiter Ring office was upstairs from this vegan cafe that we had stopped off at. So we're just kind of like, let's see if he'll come. We all got our coffees at this cafe and some like vegan carrot cake.
Let's
I
lurk
was
and
like,
see if
let's
we can
just
pin
see
him
if he comes
down.
down. And like, I think he did come down, and we're just like, I don't know if I can say anything. But it's just like, there he is. Like, it's like we're a bird watching or something like that. It's, like
Very rare.
the prairie
very
singer
rare.
songwriter in his natural habitat.
The elusive, yeah.
And I think they're the only band I've ever traded zines to get into a show. One of the first times they came to Victoria, when I lived there, which was that was the first time I saw them. Yeah, actually, that was it was the first time they came to Victoria, which was the first time I got to see them live, when they were still a 3-piece. And the only people that were there were me, and it was like me, a guy that wrote metal reviews for Exclaim, and your favorite band, Hot Hotties. And just like all of us were standing right in front of the stage, just in complete awe, fanboying out over this guy who's like,
there should be more people here, but in a way, I'm glad there's not, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like they released, let's see, I think it was like 5 albums over the course of their run. Plus there was a live album in there as well. And just played, kind of like,
well, I mean, they were
a more like
slow, they were on
melodic
Epitaph, right?
sound.
I mean, they achieved a good amount of success. I mean, to be on
Exactly.
Epitaph Records.
Yeah, and it was and it was John K. Sampson as well. There was Jason Tate, and I can't remember the other guy's name, who were previously in a band called Red Fisher from Winnipeg, who were like big in Winnipeg in the early 90s. Like I think the one video I was able to find of them on YouTube was like tagged 1992 or something like that. And then as well, I can't remember the other guitarist's name, but he was in a band called Painted Thin previously, who I know did a split with John K. Sampson solo, like a split CD that was like, half John K. Sampson solo acoustic songs, pre-Weaker Thans, and then half Painted Thin songs. And then they had a couple albums, I think. Yeah, they put out a couple albums afterwards. And yeah, just sort of more of that, like, wordy political pop punk with DIY leanings. But yeah, the Weaker Thans really sort of, like, I don't know, John K. Sampson's really got a way with words that's unparalleled to me. He's one of those folks on the level of like, on the level of like John Darnielle or like, folks like that just are like the guy from The Hold Steady that you just like, you can't fuck with lyrically. Like, that's the only way I can describe it,
Craig Finn,
you cannot
the
fuck
Hold
with
Steady
lyrically.
dude. I hold on my tattoo, arm, like I got one arm where I kind of got most of my punk tattoos, and the Hold Steady, man, that's a nice pull there. And I'll tell you, I got to give a shout out to John Bowie just because like Weaker Thans are like new to me within my past couple years. But then my best friend John Bowie, he just kind of gave me a hit. He's just like, you really got to check out the John K. Sampson solo. He just told me emphatically. He told me, go on Amazon and order this record. You will not be disappointed.
Is that Slips and Tangles?
The Provincial record.
Okay, actually. No, I haven't heard that one. Yeah.
Okay, and then there's other one I just bought at the same time, Winter Wheat, and they're just both phenomenal. It's like what you said, right? This is like just cerebral, thoughtful, a lot of care in the lyrics. It's like the perfect post-hardcore acoustic, vibe of music for people in their 30s and older.
Oh, for sure.
It's just dope. It's just dope. I love it.
They're one of those bands that I've worn out releases of theirs in multiple physical formats,
Well, like, I'm just like, it's newer to me, and I'm just grateful that I got hip to it, now rather than missing out entirely. So,
and it's funny because like I kind of like was at one point acquaintances with his replacement in Propagandy.
Oh wow.
Todd Kowalski, who played in a great band, one of the few bands from Saskatchewan that I know of, or few like musicians full stop from Saskatchewan I know of, other than like say Joni Mitchell and like a weird grindcore band from Saskatoon that I saw once.
A weird,
but yeah, of course, that being I Spy. I don't know if you ever they had.
I know that you mentioned them before.
Yeah, they were kind of like Propagandy's more screamo little brothers in the early 90s.
Okay, so can we make a cleavage here now? Because we have talked about the Weaker Thans, and we have
well,
talked about
you
John
kind
K.
of can't
Sampson.
talk about them without also talking about Propagandy.
So listen, Propagandy's technically on my list, but it's just
so
again,
I can hand that over to you if you want.
Well, I was going to say, I can just say only that I own like 4 of their records, and they're reissuing one of their older ones. They did a Kickstarter or whatever to reissue Supporting Cast, like one of their earlier records. And I'm just like, sure, I'll get this. But honestly, dude, you've got way more lived experience, and I'm happy to be educated on it. So I'll just turn that one over to you, man. What can you tell? I mean, because you've already mentioned Propagandy a whole bunch of times. So
I've seen them a couple of times. Actually, I've seen them. Actually, I think I've only seen them maybe 3 times. Once in Calgary, once in Fredericton at the Market, where I ran into them right after they got yelled at by Molly of Molly's Cafe fame, and chased
everybody got yelled at by Molly.
They were just standing there. It's like, and I knew Todd because that's who Consumer Identity had stayed with him one of the nights that we were in Winnipeg when we came through there, whatever, a few many years ago. However many years prior. And so it's just kind of like, hey buddy, how's it going? And they're like, man, we just got yelled at by this, intense
crazy
person with green hair, like some white green hair in this coffee shop down the street. And I was like, I know her.
Didn't like the way you sat in your chair. Didn't want you
her name's
in the
Molly.
Chair. Didn't like the way you smoked your cigarette.
Well, what it was they had asked her if there were animal products in her lentil soup. And she said, it's homemade and local. It doesn't matter to me. And wouldn't answer their question, and then just kept raising her voice until she just told them to leave.
No soup for you. No
exactly. They
had
a no soup, literal no soup for you moment at this Fredericton Cafe, and then went and played the Market.
Man, but we could do a whole thing on Molly's and just what went on
exactly. That
Molly's,
place, that's a place of legend right there.
For another time, really. But
I remember they were the first Canadian band to release something on Fat Records back in the 90s.
They were the first Canadian
album, How to Clean. Their album How to Clean Everything was like
I own that
huge deal when that came out. Then what was the next? I can't remember the next one, but like I blatantly ripped off like the little flyers that they would send out with their releases. I just like cut and pasted stuff full cloth and put into like some of those shitty zines that I put out when I was like 18, 19 years old living in Fredericton.
I made a couple of shitty zines
here's
myself,
an article by Propagandy for my publication.
That's right.
And honestly, and like John K. Sampson played in the band on their first 2 records. Then he went off to do.
I didn't even know that. You kept making these references during the weaker
because
and I kept getting confused. I was like, does he mean to say this and the other? But okay, so John K. Sampson was in Propagandy.
He was the original bassist in Propagandy on their first 2 albums.
I had no friggin' idea.
And then they would they would do, it was like how Bad Brains have a reggae song every like 4th or 5th song. It's like Propagandy. It's like every few songs, there'd just be John K. Sampson kind of like crooning about PG Woodhouse before Chris Hanna turns around and starts screaming about Noam Chomsky again. And
socialist, anarchist, vegan punks.
They replaced them with they replaced John with Todd Kowalski from I Spy, who also played in a little band, or I say a little band. But he played in a band called Swallowing Shit in Winnipeg that were
they
have a
7-inch.
They have when I first moved to Calgary, I actually stayed with the guy that put out their first 7-inch at his parents' house while I was looking for an apartment because he had come to Fredericton roadieing for a band or some band or other, and we'd become pen pals. Like I said, back when you would write letters.
Free ubiquitous internet.
Exactly. And I probably wrote letters to Propagandy sometime. And it's funny because like I really didn't keep up with them after the first like 4 records or so.
Okay.
But I always enjoy those records. Like I
think,
and like even when I went to go see them when they played the Marquee Club here. I feel it was like I was gonna say like last year, but it's like that was easily 5 years ago. But there was just like so much material that I was just like, people are enjoying these songs that I am not as familiar with because I just didn't keep up with them
That's
past a
fine.
certain point. But like, I remember buying their album. Their album "Today's Empire, Tomorrow's Ashes" is the only piece of music I've ever purchased at the West Edmonton Mall at the HMV there.
Good choice, anyhow.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, they were. But at the same time, they're like, because they're so vocal about politics and that sort of thing. Like, they're very formative. Like, people I know that have gotten into sort of like activism and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
A lot of them got started because they heard Propaganda. And those first few especially those first few albums, like when they were on Fat Records originally, and like a lot of like young kids would be buying this and just sort of getting radicalized into
it's cool,
not that I'm saying that's a bad thing at all, but it was just like, yeah, like I said, when actually I remember I first met one of our friends' younger sibling. I think I first met Pete Diamond.
Oh, hell yeah. He's a cool
when
cat, man.
him and a couple of his friends were talking about getting a copy of my zine taken away from them in their class at school because of stuff that I just like cut and pasted from a Propaganda, like some sort of promotional thing and put in there.
I think the anarchist whatever in that band would have approved. I mean,
yeah, exactly. And it's just kind of like, endearing that was that was what happened. But yeah, like they're definitely, they were kind of like a lot of people I know as political training wheels. While also being like a really killer band. Like, these are guys that have been playing music together basically since they were children, in terms of like Chris Hanna and Jord, whatever their drummer's name is. And I know they've been playing as a 4-piece for the past while with another guitarist. Like with the second guitarist or whatever. But yeah, like, so that the two central members of the band have been together forever. Like, and they're just these like dudes that love metal and hockey and Noam Chomsky from like, out in the prairies somewhere.
Well, it's flat and it gets cold, and I gather, and perhaps I just think it's so cool. Like, you were kind of, alluding to it a bunch just now about how, like, non-political, non-activist kind of people, just by exposure to this one band or the surrounding scenes, like, it's just that's the history of punk rock in a lot of cases.
Exactly.
That this is one instance of a phenomenon that happened across Canada and across the United States and everywhere else, where you go to you're hanging out with your teenage bonehead friends, and then eventually, like, maybe I am going to, save the friggin' whales or the narwhals or whatever,
Exactly.
If the narwhals need to be saved.
But
it's just, the activism aspect of it for non-political people. That was a cool thing. I was not in any way at all interested in that aspect of it, when I was coming up. It didn't register for me. But now, that I'm sort of going through my various midlife contortions, it's kind of, it's like it resonates with me maybe at a different time than for when these musicians were kind of pushing it out in the first place. But it's just that's kind of the joy of it, man. You can sort of plug into it anytime you want, right? So
exactly.
So who's next on your list, man? I'm curious.
Yeah, well, I guess I wanted to wrap it up by talking about, I guess, the big one for me. The big prairie artist for me that I can think of is SNFU, which like
I'm
they're
so
just
glad.
And I mean, they're a band
man.
that, like, in getting ready for this, just thinking about how they were like important to like multiple eras of like the punk and hardcore scene in Canada. Like, they started out in the early '80s. They were label mates with 7 Seconds. And, like, when they started out for their first 3 albums, I always love that every album has a 7-word title.
What? Really?
Yeah. And then
that's weird.
Every single album of theirs, except there was one that was like Fayulaba or something that was an acronym. It was a 7-letter acronym for "fuck you up like a bad accident."
Letter meaning.
And then they got back together in the like around like 91 or so, and they were like a huge band in like my early involvement, like when I first sort of came around to like punk rock shows, because they were like the first big band to come to Fredericton when I first was coming to Fredericton.
I don't know
but
how
they
many
played.
times they
It's
came
like
to Fredericton, but
yeah,
yeah.
it's like just in that time, that first, like before I moved away when I was younger, they played 3 huge shows there. They did that St. Charbel's show. I
Yep.
know they'd come there a bunch in the 80s as well, but like they played the show at St. Charbel's where like people thought the place was on fire because it was so crowded and sweaty and steamy. And then there was like the infamous show right around the time that I graduated from high school
Yep.
that where they played at the social club at UNB.
Did
But
they?
they were told that they would be playing an all ages show.
Oh.
And they got to the social club, saw it was not an all ages show, and they were pissed. So they
Yeah.
went downtown and got all the kids at TNB and just rounded up an army of skateboarders and let them in the back door of the social club.
What?
And they're just like,
man, how did I not know about this?
yeah,
That's
this was in
insane.
like 1994. But yeah,
That's
allegedly
still,
they rounded
yeah.
up. They went and found they got a crew.
I hope that's true.
They let a ton of people in. They let a ton of people in the back door, and then just convinced them to wreak havoc. And there were
okay, you punks.
At least
go be punks. Do punk things.
Yeah,
now.
There's I believe there was like at least a couple $1,000s worth of damage done to the bar that night. Just some people ripping like the brass railings from the wall out, and like somebody kicked down a ceiling fan, and just like
one thing about that is that the social club was, as you know, just down the hall from CHSR. So that would have been
I know, because I did a show there Saturday nights, and and I got out at 2 a.m. around the time the social club was closing, and there were many times that like myself and Neil Thompson would have to run from people at the social club who were just like, what are you weirdos doing?
We're inebriated 22-year-olds.
Yeah, exactly, like getting chased by drunks, or like I'd at least have to like compete with them for cabs on the way home.
Getting chased by drunks and competing. The Fredericton experience, folks.
Exactly. And then and then they played their show at the Pyramid Warehouse, where like I'm pretty sure they requested a bunch of deli trays beforehand and just like pelted the crowd with them. And then like Cheapig was running around dressed as I'm pretty sure he was dressed as Fred Flintstone at one point. And like the Cheapig was their singer, aka Ken Chin. And he would always have like costumes and just like very theatrical, like to like help the audience with food and just generally antagonize them. And yeah, like they ended up signed to Epitaph Records around the time that they were in their sort of their big like post Offspring heyday as well, and spent most of the 90s like showing up on like Much Music and stuff like that. Like there was some video, like there's a video of Cheapig talking to somebody about like his hockey picks. like on YouTube.
I read this book about that Bad Religion biography I read, a month ago or whatever. It actually gets mentioned just briefly. They did a tour, that included a stop in, I guess it was in Edmonton. And they played Bad Religion actually has their own ice hockey team. Okay. And they came up and played.
I've seen pictures of them. And
and they came up and played a game against like SNFU and their crew, as well as some other whatever local musical hooligans. And I just thought, like, for a band of that stature, I mean, Bad Religion. I mean, if you don't have Bad Religion, you don't have Epitaph Records, and if you don't have Epitaph Records, then 90s punk never even really happened,
Exactly.
I mean, let's be real. So to have SNFU being on that first kind of uptake of those bands, among them, and not doing nearly as well, of course, but still, they were in the mix, and they were recognized as being originals. Yeah,
they were in the mix at that level, and like, it wasn't super public at the time, but like, Ken. Or Cheapig, aka Ken, it's like he was gay in a scene like that, which was not always the most welcoming to still kind of jockish, and like he had a lot of mental health issues and addiction issues, and that was kind of the arc of their career over the 2000s, as you could see his health kind of physically decline.
There's a film about him. Yeah.
Yes, that was I was going to mention that, like, to get a full, a real full picture. There's a document. I'm pretty sure you can watch it on YouTube.
Yeah.
With ads Like, I'm gonna put it in the show notes. I know I've found, I've watched it previously, and that really gives a good, kind of a good picture of sort of what his later years were like. And it was unfortunate, but like
Street guy in
anytime,
Vancouver, more or less, right?
Well, he,
More or
he
less.
had a lot of,
Mental
active addiction
health and addiction
issues.
issues. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And like a friend of mine that did like ran like a flyering business for like the metal, like a lot of more like black metal scene and that kind of thing in Vancouver. Like Cheap Pig was one of the people that he would pay $20 to go put up, posters on this one
Man,
block
see,
for an afternoon. And like
just
it's
yeah, that's
I have friends who work in like the restaurant industry in Vancouver who, would kind of have to like, they would jump in and try and like, arbitrate a little bit when he was getting chased away from like their patios because he was offering to do, like, he was a visual artist as well. Like he did most of their album cover art except for their iconic stolen Diane Arbus photo from their first album, and no one else wanted to play. That they got sued for copyright infringement over, because they stole a Diane Arbus photo for the first record.
Back before the internet could make it easier to track down blatant examples of plagiarism.
Everything after that, pretty much, like Ken did the album art for, and like he was a pretty talented visual artist, and he was like, basically like offering to do people's portraits for spare change, and like it was kind of, I mentioned it in my notes that like it was really unfortunate, but I definitely heard people make the joke that he started to look more and more like their t-shirts. Like the monster on their t-shirt, like the skeleton monster that they had on their t-shirts towards the end of his life. And he really did. But it was heartbreaking because like they still toured regularly and he'd still go on tour and you'd see him and he'd be so happy to see anybody he recognized from old shows, like previous shows, and like always come up and like give you a hug and like want to chat and stuff. And like even prior to that, like, if like I remember even seeing them in like the early aughts where like before the show he was just hanging out talking to people, like bumming cigarettes.
Dude had a big heart,
like he and just was like very charismatic and just like funny little guy. It was really sad sort of seeing the ultimate arc of his life, and he did pass away a couple of years ago, but they were, like I said, SNFU were just one of those like formative, iconic Canadian bands to me. And like, as far as when I think of the Prairies, like they are like the band from the Prairies.
Hell, I remember when we did the BC episode and I kind of made a reference during the recording, like, oh yeah, BC, and it was like, no, man, no, don't even go there, son. Don't even
that was
go
just
there.
Me being pedantic, but
it was fine though. It was like, it's legit. It's like,
exactly. Yeah. Hey. So what's your last one, Matt?
Last one, I don't even really necessarily have a last one here. I mean, I've just personally really benefited a lot just from, the overall discussion. You certainly have got a lot more lived experience on it. I'm just going to give a shout out to the singer Northcote, who's based out of Victoria these days, but originally out of Saskatchewan, as a matter of fact. So, did the Christian hard rock, hardcore thing to the level that they toured Canada and in the States. And his band's name was, they were called Means. And I mean, they shared stages with, whoever was opening for Bad Religion, they opened for them, know? So it's like they got to that level. And then he just, after about 10 years of it or whatever, he just got into his own thing. And he's got a new one out. It just came out. It's this really kind of open, atmospheric, kind of folksy kind of record. The guy just sings his face off. I mean, that's actually a term that he used, in one of his Instagram videos. It's like, man, I sing it, like the way he talks, he's just like, he's recorded with Chuck Reagan from Hot Water Music. He's played the Revival tour. He's in the mix with all of these incredibly, the cool kids in the American punk scene who are still active. I mean, they give him the Instagram likes when he posts stuff and everything. And I mean, he's got this one record from, a bunch of years ago that I talked about a lot before, where it was something I was listening to a lot around Christmas time and after. So I just, again, anybody who's, out there trying their best to make even somewhat of a living at their arts, it's just like, man, I friggin' salute you, because that is a brave friggin'
Yeah.
track to take. It's just, I don't know, man. I like, the contemporary stuff, and I like just being able to speak to that a bit.
Yeah.
But before that's almost it for me. But I just wonder, Dan,
Yeah.
is there any non-Western Canadian stuff you want to shout out just before?
Honestly, you know what?
any,
Since in all the time that I've been trying to, we kind of been pushing this off.
yeah,
Or just various times it's been rescheduled because of various
been
life
bumped.
situations on
Yeah.
around. Yeah, it got bumped around, but a couple records that I love got released. That Zulu: A New Tomorrow, which I talked about previously, that finally came out. That is just like it's a record that feels important
Is
to me.
it as good as you hoped?
It is as good as I'd hoped.
Awesome.
Yeah, and everything fits. And then also MS Paint's full-length Post-American finally came out on March 10th, and that's one.
Yeah,
It took a minute to grow on me,
that.
but it's like, yeah, it's really good. It's funny. There's a couple songs that I'm just like, I'm going to be hearing this a lot this summer. And I've seen a lot of people joking, like, get out on the ground floor of the MS Paint business with this record. They're going to be huge. And also, Scowl's the stuff I've heard from Scowl's new EP that comes out in a couple weeks has been fun as well. They're like, they're one of the bands that like they opened for Limp Bizkit on their reunion tour recently, and
that sounded too weird to be real. Like Fred Durst with the gray
Fred
wig
Durst looking like he should be guided by voices. And yeah, this band Scowl, who are like kind of they're at the cusp of kind of like refining their sound a little bit, like a mix of like kind of like almost like screamy hardcore and like 90s alt rock.
Nice.
And their singer Kat Moss is kind of like she's a bit of a youth alternative fashion icon, I think. And so they're another one of those records that bands that like, I feel like they're going to be big. But I've been listening to that, they're the tracks from their new EP, Psychic Dance Routine, that they've released so far. But yeah, that's been stuff that I've been listening to lately that I've really been enjoying a lot.
Awesome. And I just want to give a shout out to to Sam I Am. They got a new record coming out on my son's birthday, actually, March 31st.
Nice.
Yeah, and they actually got this one song with a video that goes with it, Crystallized. And like,
oh wow.
And I've got like my, I listen to my phone a lot for music, and what I'll do is like I'll go into the album on iTunes and I'll just like queue up that one song over and over and over. And I think yesterday, like I listened to it like literally all friggin' day, and I didn't get tired of it. Not like I didn't. I know, the latest episode of the Ed Tech podcast that's going to come out tomorrow. That's actually named after that song, just because like I cannot get it out of my friggin' brain. But actually, when I have not been listening to it, that I've been listening to Brendan Kelly, who's the bass player and singer, one of the singers for the Lawrence Arms. Who I've really, really dived into just wholeheartedly, man. I'm just like, I'm gonna just not even. I'm just gonna go until I hit bottom with that.
Yeah.
But he has this awesome solo record. It's like it's a split acoustic solo record. Him and this guy Joe McMahon, who's some other Irish Chicago punk guy.
Yeah.
And they just have 5 songs each, and it's just I can't stop listening to it. The dude does friggin' cover of Kiss the Bottle, that awesome Joe Jawbreaker song.
Yeah.
He does some of his like just his own greatest hits or whatever. It's just the guy's so weird. And he's and anyway, I could start talking about the Falcon, which is like which is friggin' it's like half of Alkaline Trio.
Okay.
It's 1/3 of Alkaline Trio and 2/3 of the Lawrence Arms.
Nice.
And it's on friggin' Red Scare Industries, which is run by a former employee of Fat Records. So,
wow.
So it's like you got, Lawrence Arms and Alkaline Trio, who are just historically within the Chicago punk thing linked very closely. and then you got members doing these side projects on these smaller, labels, in between their major releases for both of those bands. So
Yeah.
I've kind of just been diving in on that, and thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Let me extemporize on that a bit, dude.
I just remembered one other band actually before I go that I've been listening to, a newer thing that actually my girlfriend sort of pointed me to originally. The band called Chat Pile. It's like, imagine like a gothier Jesus Lizard is the best way I can describe them. Like it's just like really like spooky, atmospheric, discordant kind of like intense sounding stuff with it's got electronic drums too, so it's kind of got a little bit of that a little bit of
the first
that
Jesus
big
Lizard
black
record
kind of sound too. Like that early Jesus Lizard big black kind of sound almost, but like spookier and gothier. And they're a newer band, like I said. Let me look up what their album's called. But yeah, they put out a full length just very recently.
Very cool.
Oh yeah, and just one other Alberta artist that I can't not mention, which is Corb Lund.
Oh hell yeah, man!
Yeah, who started out. Oh yeah, it's God's Country is the name of Chat Pile's album that I would definitely recommend.
Cool.
But yeah, Corb Lund is. I was thinking of him when I was reading Ducks. Just because
he's a fairly mainstream artist now, is he not?
He is, but he came out of the punk scene. He was in a band called The Smalls, that were like the one band in Tabor, Alberta. And yeah, he had his first big hit was a song called The Roughest Neck Around that was about working in the oil sands, that I used to hear on country radio all the time when I worked at it. Because I briefly lived in the suburbs of Edmonton before I moved to Halifax just for a few months, and I worked at a video store while I was there, and had to listen to country radio the entire time, and Corb Lund was the only thing that would come on that radio station that I could stand.
Gets you
but
through
anyways,
until
yeah. Anyways, thanks for another episode, Matt.
Well, Dan, thanks for another episode. I've enjoyed this a lot. I gather people are checking the videos and the recordings and whatnot. I hope you do. We hope you enjoy it. Folks, it has been a time.
It has.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.
Bye for now.
Bye.